We are here tonight. It seems like only minutes ago we were talking about episode 8 of The Mandalorian. And now we're going to do kind of an episode or a season 1 kind of overview and contextualization of The Mandalorian in the Star Wars universe in What If He Doesn't Survive season 1 Mandalorian recap. Starting now. Wait, not quite now. I've got one thing I must do. As promised,
yes.
I purchased a Target Star Wars Episode 9 cereal. I got the Kylo Ren.
It's basically Lucky Charms, right?
It is. You know, it's weird. It's got the Lucky Charms marshmallows, but it's got the weird. Do you remember the Batman cereal that came out in '89 as the time to? Yeah. It's got that same. It's got that same cereal. It's like knockoff Captain Crunch. It even has these things that look like little bats, but I think they're supposed to be TIE fighters.
I never like Captain Crunch.
Oh, well, you're also a red-wearing communist, apparently.
I know.
But
there's a great bit from Brian Babylon, who's a comedian, about Captain Crunch.
Because doesn't it like mess up after a while? Doesn't it like mess up the roof of your mouth? It's like, oh.
That's how you know it's working. But you guys, it's not.
You know,
it's
they
not
got
complete.
that good shit in there, man. They put some crack in that.
So what are you drinking there? What is that? Star Wars milk? It's blue milk? Is it blue? Oh my
god!
No.
Is that laundry detergent?
What is that? Formaldehyde? Wow!
Oh my god! This is so
just another Friday night.
Wait, I gotta do the Luke.
And Ian's gonna die right tomorrow.
Wow. This is gonna get a lot of hits.
I think people are gonna have to do some hits if they're gonna survive.
Yeah,
this
you
episode.
gotta do it. Like, what can you drink this week? Give me the top Star Wars products to drink. Blue milk. Or
by the way, you can't buy this. I actually dyed this myself. Trade secret.
I was gonna say that is really blue.
Yeah, that was like. Dude, that straight up looks like laundry detergent.
Kind of tastes like it too, but I think that's just a cereal.
Oh,
wow.
Did you ever see the videos? Oh my god, there's this great video online before we get into it, where someone's at the Star Wars Disneyland Park, Galaxy's Edge.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and like this lady tries the blue milk, and her face. Like, she has to pretend like she likes it, but you could tell the editor clearly fucking hated her because he even included like an uncomfortable like swallowing like glory sound to it.
That's funny.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Look that up.
And like Galaxy's Edge has like multiple videos of people trying blue milk, and you can tell they all fucking hate it.
we should record a podcast from Galaxy's Edge, right?
Oh my god!
In about 5 years when we could afford it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Goals.
I'll get the money. Just
you get the money. Oh my god! You could sell that there Boba Fett for $50.
Yeah, that
not
might buy you a
like,
little Matchbox plane.
He's throwing his toys on his bed anyway, so.
It's my childhood. I'm throwing my childhood away. George Lucas raped my childhood. Sorry.
Wow.
No, so I mean, the cool thing about this Star Wars Episode 9 cereal is it is just like the movie. It reminds me of other things, and it has no nutritional value. But no, I think one of the things that, and we've sort of talked about this before, but something that The Mandalorian does is, for me anyway, is it revitalizes Star Wars as something that can be exciting and mysterious again. The movies have just not, with the exception of, I mean, I think I was a big fan, even though it was really derivative of Force Awakens. I was a huge fan of The Last Jedi. I know that's a very controversial statement, but I love that it so much ends. Better now. Well, yeah, but I love that it on the podcast we recorded after seeing Last Jedi a couple of years ago. I was like, I love that Rian Johnson has cleared the table. They can literally go anywhere. And then when J.J. Abrams was announced as coming back, I'm like, oh no. And they
didn't go anywhere.
No, it was like another like slow speed chase through outer space.
Yeah,
even though it was much more quick moving and everything.
Yeah, I was talking to my buddy John Suntress about it today, and we were just like, man, why couldn't they just sit in a writer's room take their time. I'm not talking pre-Force Awakens. Just take your time and plot everything out. Ask Lawrence Kasdan if he'd be willing to, even be a co-writer for all 3 movies. I mean, he seems to really get the universe and get the characters and know them. I mean, this is the guy who co-wrote Empire and Jedi. I mean, but man, the more I think about it, to have the co-writer of Batman versus Superman and Justice League,
Chris Terrio, yeah, he wrote Argo, but Argo is gone as fuck from memory. And I'm sorry. And like Chris Terrio, the guy who's known for making 2 rushed scripts is gonna write the finale. What? Did they just need to get a fucking Indy 500 racer to fucking write?
I know he's a co-writer, but this is a guy who possibly came up with the idea of Martha. Come on now.
I bet he did. And I bet Zack Snyder's like, that's so cool. I'm edgy.
Well, here, and I think this is the touchstone for possibly the conversation about how the Mandalorian figures into all this, which is the idea of a plan. Now, at the end of our season 8 or chapter 8, discussion, Mike, you had brought up Kathleen Kennedy, and you had started to disparage her, I think. And David, you chivalrously stepped in and said, "Hey, let's play off."
Dark side.
I have some criticisms of Kathleen Kennedy, not the same that are leveled by the people who are wandering the dark, the dark web, hating all things Star Wars. But I think she does have some responsibility because she was steering this Star Wars ship. And what is just amazing to me is there's stories out there going years back saying that there was never a grand Marvel-style plan for this new trilogy, which I can kind of accept, but someone had to be severely asleep at the wheel to go from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi to Rise of Skywalker. Because if Rian Johnson is allowed at the script stage to completely undo a lot of Star Wars lore, not undo it, but just to say a lot of this stuff doesn't matter, we're going to kill off these characters, and the universe means something completely different now. Right. Before they shot anything, the people behind the scenes knew what they were doing. And so someone, possibly Kathleen Kennedy, who was steering the ship, should have said, okay, if this is what's going to be for episode 8, then since we're going to have a trilogy, we need to abandon all this cutesy, let's not have a plan and fly by the seat of our pants nonsense. We need to have an outline for what episode 9 is going to be. So that's either we're going to pick up the pieces from Rian Johnson, or we're just going to have JJ come in and remake Return of the Jedi and kind of ignore that episode 8 ever happened, which is kind of what they did. Now, there's talk now that the movie's out and everything that there was a longer cut. There's the whole Matt Smith character and entire story arc that was cut around and cut out, which sounded like would have been more interesting. But I keep going back to The Mandalorian and what Favreau, Filoni, and their entire team of writers and directors, they make it look so effortless to put together an 8-episode or an 8-chapter TV show and working on season 2 that just blows the last few Star Wars movies out of the water just in terms of ideas and planning. What you can do with this galaxy.
Well, when you actually put effort into something, it looks effortless. And I'm not saying these guys did not put effort into it, but I will tattoo it on my chest. I will carve it, all right, on whatever orifice of my body you want me to. They should have kept Michael Arndt as screenwriter because he wrote Toy Story 3, which I don't think anyone can say they have not cried watching it, or maybe if they just don't want to be men and admit they haven't. And then he wrote Little Miss Sunshine, which is a brilliant film. This guy knows his shit. And the thing was that people always forget is that he told Kathleen Kennedy it was going to take 2 years to get his script ready. And Kathleen Kennedy has said in various behind-the-scenes videos that we didn't have that kind of time and we needed to get a script made. So she has admitted to rushing it through the door. And because of that, it ruined a lot of things. Now, if they wanted to take their time after The Force Awakens, when JJ set up his mystery box and all these things were here, they could have done that, but they didn't. And I think Rian Johnson created a film that, as a film, an individual picture, is very good. But as a Star Wars film, it's something that adheres to people who have known this property since 1977. To say that none of it matters is troubling, especially in the comedic manner that he did it. And then when when they went into panic mode and fired Colin Trevorrow, who I don't think he would have done a much better job, and you get J.J. Abrams to do it, and then you get Chris fucking Terrio to write it. It just gets worse, and just the whole thing was just a trilogy about pleasing the shareholders. And my number one worry about this trilogy from the beginning was, I hope this doesn't feel like a horse shoot-in trilogy, because it felt very clear by the Return of the Jedi that this was a series of films that ended. And so how are we going to feel like this is a natural progression when they're not just writing in a continuation of the story? And my greatest fear came true, and it became that. And in terms of the film division, Star Wars is not doing well because Han Solo, we all know what happened with that. And I think right now Mandalorian and Kenobi and Disney Plus is Disney's last hope, pun intended, with where they're going to go with this.
Well, they're supposed to make some kind of an announcement next month about, what the next theatrical release would be. And again, what's the rush in announcing? Everything is rush, rush, rush. It's like it's like they're gonna lose their fan base if they don't release a movie or make an announcement about a movie. Chill out.
Yeah. Well, the only thing that, have you heard any of the talk about what that announcement's going to be?
Well, I know well, I've heard a couple of things. One is that Disney Plus, they're talking about a Darth Maul series, which I do not want, and the other one is it's kind of been on and off about whether or not they're still giving Rian Johnson a trilogy. But
I would be fine with him getting a trilogy. I think he would do wonderful with Star Wars with something that's not pre-established.
Yeah.
Where he can kick the doors down and do whatever the fuck he wants to, and that would be awesome to see.
Wow.
Well, the one thing, there's a YouTuber named Mike Zero who has a lot of alleged insider information, and he's been right a bunch of times. No, but he is. I watched something from him the other day about there's talk of doing. I'm not totally up on my Star Wars lore outside of the movies. Was the Old Republic? Was that was all? Long time ago.
Knights of the Old Republic was a video game. Yeah, and it's cool. It's interesting. Yeah.
But it was Knights of the Old Republic is one of the best. I love that Star Wars game because it introduces a universe of Star Wars that we haven't seen before, but still is kind of familiar. You know what I would love to see? I would love to see a Star Wars universe where the technology, and I know you shouldn't write your own film in your head, but whatever, fuck it. I wouldn't want to see a Star Wars trilogy with the world of Star Wars that isn't as technologically advanced as it is now, and see how they get to there and see a real new universe.
So when was Knights of the Old Republic? When was that set in terms of the chronology that we know?
I mean, it was prior to the
years before
it was prior to Episode 1, like thousands of years before Episode 1.
Because if I have this right, I think that was one of the ideas they were toying with for this new series of movies. And there was talk that they were trying to get Keanu Reeves and Anthony Hopkins to headline, which I think that would be really cool because they're talking about doing this. Like these would come out in, I think, 2023. So it sounds like they're trying to put cinematic Star Wars on ice for a few years, possibly give the Disney Plus series some time to breathe and grow, and then come out with something that is Star Wars, but it's not, it could be its own thing.
Replace Anthony Hopkins with Al Pacino and you have a Devil's Advocate reunion.
No.
The Force.
The Jedi! You think the Jedi are good? Yeah.
He'd just end up being like Forrest Whitaker in Rogue One. No, I mean, but that's kind of the thing, and I think that's where, I'm excited about that only because of The Mandalorian, because I see what a show like that could be. Because with something we didn't talk about on our episode or Chapter 8 recap is there's a line of dialogue in that show where the Mandalorian is talking to the armorer about the kind of Mandalore history, and how he has to take the child to find its people, and its people are, I can't remember, there's like an ancient religion or an ancient sect called the Jedi. And it's weird because like this is all after Return of the Jedi, so it gives you the feeling that the movies that we know, the original trilogy, they're all about the Force and the dark side and the light side and the Jedi and all that. But that could be very localized to this faction of people who are fighting for the fate of the galaxy. The people on the Outer Rims, and even like as you get further and further away from the Skywalker family, the less people actually know about this stuff. So to them, it's still myths and legends, kind of like the Han Solo angle.
Totally, yeah. I mean, you can think about the word of mouth of how news is spread and how folklore is created. After a while, when it gets handed down from people to people, from planet to planet, you just wonder what's true and what's right and what lasts, or what's lost in translation. And so that's like, you remember when Rey was talking to Finn in Force Awakens, she's like, wait, Luke Skywalker, that's real? And I love that moment, because that's one of the cool things about Force Awakens. It establishes it's been a long time.
Yeah.
And it's like some of the stuff is like ancient, yeah.
And that's the thing that really sparked my curiosity about this Mandalorian exchange, is that's not ancient. I mean, Return of the Jedi just happened. Yeah. But it kind of speaks to this idea that, the government fell, but the interstitial politics and religion of the people involved was not known or as important to people, other than the fact that the government fell. Like they didn't.
Sure.
Mandalorian, he heard of the Jedi maybe, but he doesn't think of them really as an active force to be reckoned with. Whereas in the prequels and leading up through Jedi, we kind of get the idea that the Jedi were, celebrated like space police, like they're on every planet. They got wiped out by this Order 66 and all that. But as far as the extent of their powers and their connection to the Force, and does the Force exist, like all of that stuff is kind of highfalutin big city stuff. Whereas Mando and his folks on the Outer Rim are just kind of like out in the sticks, just trying to survive. They don't know about all this other stuff.
Well, I would love to see a show on your note about maybe the birth of the Jedi, maybe about the birth of all these things that we know. Because the thing is, we are familiar with all these familiar tropes of Jedi, dark side, everything else. Well, how did this all come to being? What was the universe like before all of this? I want to see, because if Star Wars is a universe, then try to really explore that universe. You don't have to use the same old things. You don't need TIE fighters or Star Destroyers and all that. That's something that Lucas did with the prequels, despite the poor writing and all that. And he did do that. He did something extremely different. And if I could see something where maybe we could see, oh God help me, how the Republic might have been a thing or turned into a thing, that would be fascinating. And that's something that's written within a television medium. But for a film medium, once you write that for television, where can we see how everything goes wrong? Maybe a film I would like to see a film trilogy about how this First Order, everything came along. So this doesn't feel like a prequel, if you will.
Yeah, I don't know, because then you're just kind of like filling in spots. I wouldn't want another trilogy about how the First Order. True. I mean, maybe a one and done kind of thing. But I just like that's what I like about Mandalorian is it's really light on the Force, and it's just giving us lived-in characters, and it's just kind of like on the outskirts of the Skywalker saga. Thankfully, and that's what I always wanted in some kind of like a expansion, live action expansion of what we know is the Star Wars universe. That's what was always cool to me, is because even when I was watching as a kid, you watched the cantina scene, or you watched, the characters in Jabba's palace. It's like, okay, what's their story? And I recently watched Return of the Jedi again, and I thought I thought the same thing again. It's like, here's Boba Fett's just kind of like hanging out in Jabba's palace. It's like I don't know if he was like just taking a break, and this is a place where he can kind of chill and stuff. And I thought about how I viewed Boba Fett then, as a I guess I was 12 years old at the time, and for all I knew, I think when Empire came out, you could send away like a mail order action figure to get your Boba Fett special order mail away figure. Initially, it had the shooting rocket, but that had to get nixed.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like all obviously pre-internet, not everything is like this was all kind of like this mystery, and now the way comics, books, everything, the way all of that has, just kind of embellished everything and maybe oversaturated certain characters. Boba Fett's kind of become like somewhat like the Wolverine of Marvel Comics. He's just in every he's just in like every comic. And it was nice back then to just have this mystery. Of course, the way he died was even as a 12-year-old, I thought like, what? You just died like that? He's like, my jetpack. The funny thing is like the jetpack that the Mandalorian gets in this series looks much better than the jetpack that Boba Fett was wearing. So, yeah.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Sure. All right. Well, what trilogy would you guys like to see happen if there was to be a trilogy?
I don't want another trilogy, to be honest. I mean, I'm fine right now with the Disney Plus series, and like I said, I'm fine with Rian Johnson doing whatever he wants to do. If he wants to do a trilogy, that would be great. I would like it to be so distant from the Skywalker saga. Yeah. That's all I ask. Do whatever you want.
Separate the whole Star Wars story thing.
Yeah, because
let's make a movie.
The Skywalker family and the Palpatine family. They don't have a monopoly on the Force. They're just one family. So that they like Ian is saying. I mean, this is just one kind of microcosm, one story in this universe. I mean, I'm sure there's other beings, other families, other creatures, other characters who use the Force. We could see that somehow, but as long as it steers clear of political mumbo jumbo, steers clear of trade embargoes.
I think it's an interesting point, and the reason I bring this up is because I think we have this preset notion of our head of, well, Star Wars has to be a trilogy. It has to be this thing because it's all episodic. Well, what if Star Wars broke away from that? When they get back into movies, what if they made singular films? What if they experimented? What if they tried different things? Certainly The Mandalorian is one of those examples. I think with something with a huge budget for a Hollywood film, that's something that I don't know if anyone can answer at this point, because I think just like all of us, we're scratching our heads as to where that could go, and right now
just scratched my head,
scratching their heads. Yeah.
Well, I think.
God. Yeah. I mean, you look at what the kind of the course correction that Warner Brothers is making with the DC movies recently. You could say that started with Wonder Woman, kind of, but I would I would wager that it started with James Wan's Aquaman, where you're doing something totally different. Yes, that's also a kitchen sink movie, but it's very fun and crazy, and kind of bug nuts, and they totally went for it. But it's a different tone and feel from your typical superhero movie. And then you had Shazam, and then you had Joker, and it's like, whoa! And these are just standalone movies that I think it could work well in the Star Wars universe. Now, some may say, well, they did that with Rogue One, which is basically like a heist movie or something like that, or Solo. But I'm sorry, those were still tied into the Skywalker saga, literally.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons that we kind of grew up on trilogies of movies, and it's also from a corporate standpoint, and we're talking about Disney, it's a lot easier to package the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, and then this new whatever they're calling this thing, the sequel trilogy, into a nice Blu-ray box set. You've got your 9 movies.
Right.
But I think now that Disney also owns Marvel, they could stand to. I mentioned earlier that Marvel plans everything out for like the next half decade at least, as far as like the titles are releasing. They've got these huge story groups and everything. It's all very well controlled. And I think that's very admirable. I think Star Wars could benefit from that too, even if they just have how cool would it be to see a standalone movie of say Keanu Reeves and Anthony Hopkins as in the Knights of the Old Republic, and it's just one movie telling their story, and then you've got another movie that tells a different story in a different era, but maybe there's something that connects them, sort of like the way you've got Thor and Iron Man and all that stuff. There's a bit of connected tissue. I'm not saying you have to have a Nick Fury type show up at the post-credit sequence or something, but then imagine a Star Wars team-up movie, like the next big Star Wars event movie draws on all these kind of individual chapters. Or you get Rian Johnson, you give him this, let's say it's the Knights of the Old Republic or whatever trilogy with Keanu Reeves and whoever, that's set so far removed from what we know as Star Wars that you can't have any points of reference except maybe, you can have a lightsaber or you can have a mention of a Jedi or a Sith. But something that I've always kind of lamented is because everything in Hollywood now is, at least as big budget stuff, is all franchises and comic book movies and existing IP, that it's hard to have something that's original, that has its own identity, that's something you've never seen before. And the few times we do get something like that, it flops. I'll just use Jupiter Ascending as an example, but that was also a terrible movie. But imagine a Star Wars film where you have the name Star Wars, you have just enough touchstones throughout the script to tell people that they are watching something that they're sort of familiar with, but go completely other different places, not just in terms of the characters, but also the structure of the movie. Don't have them fight a giant robotic moon at the end that can blow up planets, that kind of a thing. Just I would love to see a space fantasy Star Wars that recaptures the imagination the same way that A New Hope did in 1977.
I think that's why I was saying earlier that I think Rian Johnson made a wonderful movie, but not a wonderful Star Wars, not even Skywalker movie. Yeah. And I think for someone who desperately wants to break the mold, he would be a wonderful choice for creating. Just give him one film, see where it goes, see if people are interested.
What I liked about the way The Last Jedi ended is that anything can happen now.
Yeah.
And instead,
unless you hire J.J. Abrams.
Well, and I like Abrams as a producer. I like him as a director. I think it would have been cool to see him and Johnson collaborate on this movie and have Johnson write it and then Abrams direct it.
Be friends, not enemies.
Well, they're friends, but I feel like there was so much. I was actually relieved when Snoke died, and that was taken off the table, and it was wow, now we're in new territory here. Yeah. Anything goes, anything can happen, and
I agree with that part.
The whole kill the past thing, and it was great. Let's build something different is basically what he was saying, and that's what Johnson was saying and Kylo Ren. But then, it just felt like Palpatine was going to be this default villain, And I love Ian McDiarmid, but man, I didn't want to see him return like this.
Yeah.
And I just feel like it's tacked on. It's just kind of giving us something that's familiar. And I think I said in the Kicking the Seat podcast, when after our screening, this is just kind of like reheated comfort food. It does feel good, but it doesn't. It doesn't taste as good
as when it's fresh.
Yeah, it's fresh. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Wow, geez, that just looks terrible.
Are you okay?
I hope your wife sees that.
Oh, she doesn't watch anything I do.
Yeah. Anyway, let me see your tongue. Oh, geez.
Oh my god.
Boy. But that's the thing that was even I'll admit, even when I was sitting there at the stadium at Star Wars Celebration last April, I was thrilled to see Ian McDiarmid come out and laugh like in person. I was like, oh, this is gonna be nuts, and even when the title was revealed, I'm like, what is this? And it, is it like a Skywalker cult? Is it like a, and once it was revealed, I'm like, oh,
yeah,
okay.
That's kind of what Abrams does. He gets you so curious as to what the plot's going to be. He did that with The Force Awakens.
He did it with Lost.
Yeah, and then you see and with Lost, and you see what the plot is, and you're like, oh, I've seen this before.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy to introduce Knights of Ren in Force Awakens, and then really do nothing with them. Like you actually bring them into the movie.
Knights of Ren when they killed them off. There were so many scenes people told me about. I was like, remember that scene? I'm like, no. That movie went so fast. I don't even remember what the fuck happened in it.
And I'm gonna see it again this weekend. Just to because my wife and daughter haven't seen it, and I'm pretty much dragging my daughter to it. But I just want to, now that I know what to expect, I want to see what that kind of viewing experience would be. But I don't know if you guys picked this up when we watched it originally, but when that new character who's supposedly Lando's daughter, what's her name again? Jannah. Yeah. When she's introducing herself, we don't even see her on screen. It's like they talk, and then she's like, okay, let's go. And I think it's Poe who says, by the way, what's your name? And it's like, oh, I'm Hannah. And you just hear her say that because they cut away to where they're going.
Yeah.
So we don't even, she's not even on screen introducing herself. And, whatever. It's maybe I'm nitpicking that moment, but it just seems so odd. You have a new character.
I don't know where I'm from. Well, maybe we should find that out.
But it's just like we do all this talking, and then, oh yeah, by the way, what's your name? And cut to different scene and what? I don't know.
Well, that's the thing is there's so
Chris.
I don't understand. But there's all this talk about the different cuts and all the stuff that was cut out and how the movie was kind of Frankenstein together. I don't know how Hollywood works, so there's probably someone who works in the industry who's listening to this right now. That would be awesome. But no, the idea that if I'm plotting out something, this goes back to the idea of a story. How did it get to this point where you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this thing? You don't even know how it's going to end or what it's about or how it's going to be reshaped in the edit. You've got all these different people with their all the different cooks in the kitchen. It just doesn't seem that hard to me. I mean, even Mike, when you were talking about Art writing was he just talking about the outline for the trilogy that was going to take 2 years, or was this just for Force Awakens?
No, he was writing the whole script. He was doing the outline and writing multiple drafts.
For Force Awakens.
Yeah. And he told Kathleen Kennedy, well, it's going to take me this long to get it done. She's like, why is it taking this long? He told her 2 years. And she just said, we can't wait that long. And she literally says that on the DVD or Blu-ray.
Well, here's the thing. Yeah. Was it, so what happened? Did he not, I'm a little fuzzy here. Did he not write Force Awakens, or did he?
He didn't, no.
He's credited.
Kernel of ideas of his. Yeah. When it says story by, Okay, they take little. You have your. This is when I worked in LA. You would have your outline, your structure outline, right? Like this scene. It's just a one sentence of what happens in each scene to break it down. Well, they would just take maybe the scenes that he likes and change it.
Yeah, and you still got to give credit to him because he made those bits.
Yeah. Because so they took the elements and they took it out, but they didn't have him write the whole thing, and they had only 6 months with J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan, and J.J. said to Lawrence Kasdan, "Well, let's write a movie that will charm everybody," or it could have been actually J.J. who said that. So Lawrence Kasdan's like, "Well, I know what charming is." And then they just wrote. If you've seen an interview with Lawrence Kasdan,
I know, yeah, he's kind of got that voice, but that was more of a Palpatine voice.
Yeah. It's like if you see like the behind the scenes when they're talking about like on Star Wars Empire of Dreams, when they're talking about Han Solo dying, he goes, "Well, somebody needs to die."
Well, that's what Ford always wanted.
Like, God damn, dude, what the fuck? But they only gave him 6 months. And then, and then I'm talking to him, and they rushed it through the door. They rushed it through the door in 6 months, and then they had to start shooting. Now, if they only had 6 months for that, well, they were already shooting The Last Jedi right after, they saw The Force Awakens, and, Ryan saw the script for Force Awakens, and he just went, fuck it. Then they kind of rushed that through the door, and then you had the the Rise of Skywalker, which is talk about fan pandering. That's what that movie was, and I think hopefully I never want a movie to bomb, despite the Facebook sort of jokes that we were making earlier, but I kind of do want this movie maybe to underperform. Just so then Disney can go, okay, where do we stop? Where do we go? What can we do? Because even now, as people who love Star Wars here, we don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think, David, you brought up Star Wars Celebration earlier. When that comes back in February, is it?
Yeah.
I think it's Sabiensky said to
I
me
think it's going to be in April.
I don't want to go to that because it feels like the Lenny Riefenstahl Star Wars event. And he's like, "What is this? Triumph of the Jedi?" Yeah.
No, I think they're just going to rename it to Mandalorian Celebration because
Well,
I can just see like I don't know who the guests are if they've announced anything, but I mean they'd be fools to not just like completely roll out the red carpet for this show because I think
it better be Nick Nolte.
Oh, that would be great. And we were talking I think on the last
episode. They're going to do it now.
Mm-hmm. What's
They're
that?
going to do it now. They're totally going to do that now. They're going to bring out Nick Nolte.
But he's only going to be there for 48 hours.
Oh, boy.
Sorry. No, but we talked briefly last episode about how great it was to have Carl Weathers and Nick Nolte in this show. And I think early on in Mandalorian, we kind of assumed, these are going to be cameos or they're going to be like one episode stints, but they became real fleshed out, lovable characters. And they're, if they do get people to come up and play these bit parts in season 2, that's what's exciting to me because you can get a cameo or they can announce an actor who perhaps hasn't been like in the limelight, kind of like what Tarantino likes to do. And like, that's cool. This person's going to be in a Star Wars show. Now that's sort of an indication to me, like, they're going to be a part of this new lore, this new canon.
Right. Yeah. It'll be very interesting to see what Star Wars Celebration will be like, because there was so much vitriol with Last Jedi, and now there's people who are fine with Rise of Skywalker. There's people who are critics. Obviously, most of them are not, but there's people who are disappointed. So it's the whole thing all over again, and I do not envy Mr. Jabrams. At all. It's.
You're trying to say Jar Jar Abrams?
No. J. Abrams.
Well, Abrams is going to be fine. I mean, he just inked like a multi-gazillion-dollar deal with Fox, or not Fox, but some rival studio, right? And that was, he kind of left the Disney umbrella after the Star Wars. So
yeah, I don't blame him. I mean, he's got Bad Robot Productions, and yeah, look at he's got the Cloverfield stuff. He's got all sorts of things. He's always spinning plates.
Well,
I just hope that he would leave franchises alone. He worked on Mission Impossible. He worked on Star Trek. Worked on Star Wars. Move on.
Well,
and that's the thing. Is like
do his own thing once, but it wasn't very successful. And that was Super 8.
Super 8 was great. Yeah.
I got to go back and watch Super 8 again. I hated that movie.
Wow.
But
okay.
Like legit. I mean, that's the thing. It's like. And again, I need to watch it because I think that was during the era when I wasn't getting a whole lot of sleep. I know that's not very descriptive, but no, I saw that. I'm like, oh, this guy, they're calling him the next Spielberg, so he's just going to try and be Steven Spielberg, and I wasn't fine with that.
He just made a fan film for Close Encounters.
But Spielberg was also a producer in that movie, so
sure. But I mean,
get that money.
Steven Spielberg was a producer on the Transformers film, so I don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Like you collect the paycheck.
Yeah, but Michael Bay wasn't trying to be Spielberg, okay?
In his own mind, he was. No. Yeah, one day we're gonna have to get you to just open up about all your Michael Bay information, Mike. I'm deadly curious.
More than Michael Bay, there's like when I worked on Public Enemies and shit like that.
Okay, that'll be a special episode sometime.
I have nothing bad to say about Christopher Nolan. He's great.
That's great to know. But no, I mean legitimately, where was I going with it? I don't know. But yeah, so Star Wars Celebration.
J.J. Abrams is a hack. No, I just kidding.
Jeez.
He's not a hack. He's very talented, but I think
he's very good at directing other people's movies. No, he did a great job with The Force Awakens, and I think that's my favorite one in the whole trilogy.
For me, it's a tie between. I love the way The Force Awakens made me feel.
Mm-hmm.
I loved even more, I think, the way that Last Jedi made me think and feel. Because I'm with David on this. It's not a movie that ages perfectly because I understand some of the fan criticisms about, the way Luke Skywalker went out. It's not perfect, but as far as taking the idea of Star Wars and all this nostalgia people had for it and turning it into something that we haven't seen before, I think that's very admirable. And that was the last time Star Wars felt fresh to me until, The Mandalorian.
Yeah. Yeah. If only they did something with Finn's character, because that's someone they actually did something that you didn't see someone do something with before. And then they just kind of left him there.
Well, that's something that, I've mentioned on the Rise of Skywalker podcast we did. In the years since Rise of Skywalker came out, I did a deep dive into, kind of YouTube Star Wars culture and absorbed a lot of the vitriol. And I really listened to the complaints, and some of them are, just trolling, but some of them are legit questions and problems people have with the direction of the series. And since Rise of Skywalker has come out, did I say, I might have said Rise of Skywalker before, I meant Last Jedi. But since Rise of Skywalker came out, there have been people doing retrospectives on this new trilogy and really pointing out the flaws of how they just kind of threw away a lot of the stuff that they set up in The Force Awakens. Minor things like, where did Maz Kanata find Luke's lightsaber? She was like, that's a story for another time.
Yeah,
I guess it still is. But also, Finn is a main character. He's sort of like the main character in that movie, and then Rey is kind of like important too. So it's like the two of them could have had an amazing trilogy together, but they switched the focus almost exclusively to Rey and turned Finn into a completely generic character. All the stuff we learned about him in The Force Awakens is thrown out in movies 2 and 3.
And it wouldn't
all we know is he doesn't like the Last Order because they're bad. It's like, what if we found out something about Finn that he's not telling us? Maybe he shot people at a village before indiscriminately and murdered them, and just the guilt from that weighed on him. I'm not telling him how to write it, but something like that. We learned something about Finn, and we want to know about him, but we know nothing. I mean, at least with the original trilogy, yeah, we were invested in Luke, but the love story between Han and Leia was so simple and worked wonderfully, as we pointed out on that original podcast. And then, of course, you know, with Return of the Jedi, they kind of got lost they didn't know what to do with the characters like they did here. Decided the protagonist, even the protagonist, they didn't know what to do with.
Yeah.
Well, if you know, even back in the original trilogy, with the first movie, it was just foreign. It was a foreign territory, and they didn't know. Lucas didn't know that he would be linking Luke and Leia as brother and sister. Yeah, you know, because he didn't know that how successful the first one would be. He had no idea. So, I mean,
they didn't link that together. And Lucas always likes to say, "Oh, I planned these movies ahead of time." Bullshit. You never did, and you didn't. Like, really, you had like Luke open mouth kiss your sister. You know, no, you didn't, man. Like, and that's okay if you didn't. Just admit it, dude. Just admit it. And
well, I mean, that's the thing, though.
Prequels, he started to plan it a little more. It's just that he didn't have someone who could write it. And the reason that the first Star Wars, as a structural screenplay, not the dialogue with the Tashi Station and all that worked, was because Francis Ford Coppola ghost wrote it.
Yeah, and then that first, the initial edit of it was apparently, you know, atrocious. Like it was ungodly long, and someone came in and trimmed it down. Sort of, it's like poetry. It rhymes with what happened with Rise of Skywalker.
Marsha couldn't do the fucking job, so he divorced her ass. So no.
Wow. She's the one who earned the Oscar, not him.
Yes, true. Take that, George. You fucking douchebag.
Jeez.
Let us know how you really feel, Mike.
But you can't take him anywhere.
You can't. That's why I do my show in a bar.
But no, I think going back to The Mandalorian, just the possibilities that the show opens up as far as, you know, what Star Wars is. I get the feeling that there's these different branches at Disney or Lucasfilm or whatever. There's like the TV section and the movie section. They're just not talking to each other, or maybe the TV section was ramped up in the middle of this whole fiasco or whatever. But it just seems Favreau and company, again, make it look so effortless. I know it's hard to write a movie and everything, but they wrote an 8-episode or an 8-chapter series that you could have cut into like 2 movies, you know, just lengthwise. Yeah. And it's so tight and so invigorating in so many different places that, you know, it doesn't have the same, the new movies don't have the same emotional charge the same way that the Mandalorian does in a lot of respects. Aside from the kind of nostalgia bombs, like it's great seeing, you know, Luke and Leia and Han all together and stuff like that. But, you know, the Mandalorian does a great job of taking the nostalgia out of the picture for the most part, because you're not just relying on, hey, look, it's these people in these costumes. It's these people in these costumes, and they're meeting new people in different costumes and different kind of droids we haven't seen before, different planets and terrains, really making it feel like a galaxy.
And situations and things we've known before are kind of turned on their head. We didn't know this whole kind of religion of the Mandalores. Maybe we did in the Clone Wars, which admittedly I'm gonna watch it after this. Okay, I'll do my homework, and I will too. But we didn't really know this kind of why. We didn't know there was this whole thing about why they would take their helmets off, and that, you know, actually they're not these bad guys. They were people who were oppressed, who were probably foundlings like this guy. And it's interesting how we see this other side of the universe that brings not just a different coat of paint to it, but some character to it, which is what really makes it fascinating.
Yeah, because I mean, really, when it comes down to it, I think Star Wars has always been about, more so, what resonates with people is the character moments. You know, when in A New Hope when Luke sits down and listens to Obi-Wan talking about his father. We lean on the edge of our seats. We lean closer into the closer to the screen. Those moments to me are better than dogfights in space and speeder chases, and you do have some of that in the new trilogy. You do have some really good character moments. Sure, I was disappointed in Rise of Skywalker, but I liked it mainly for some of the emotional beats that it did hit. Whether it's moments, like with Chewbacca reacting to Leia's death, or even that brief moment where Lando's having a conversation with Poe. I mean, I think that those moments really resonate, and they enrich these characters and give them a lot more dimension. And it's, to me, what makes it's those moments in between all these space battles and breaknecks, space chases and all that. Those are the moments that really matter. When we first see Han and Leia reuniting in Force Awakens, I got choked up. I've said this before. I was not expecting, at least in the first two movies, Force Awakens and Last Jedi, to see our legendary kind of characters, our heroes, not be so heroic anymore. Just having life take a toll on them was really interesting to me. It really resonated that, hey man, life puts you through the ringer. Life happens. We got to keep moving. Got to keep. Sometimes we continue to do what we're familiar with. He went back to smuggling. She went back to running the government or the resistance. And Luke, was licking his wounds on his island. He was filled with shame and guilt and resentment towards a lot of things. I love that line where he says, like, you take away the myth and the Jedi failed. And I agree with him. I think the Jedi failed Anakin terribly. But so I there's a lot that I do appreciate about the new trilogy. I just feel like it can't help itself with these callbacks to the original trilogy, and it's really unnecessary. I think that's what's, again, really refreshing about The Mandalorian, that it doesn't really care to tie in with really anything, but it also drops certain things. I mean, it mentions Canto Bight. It mentions, you have Bill Burr making fun of Gungan language. It's just
Life Day.
Yeah, I mean, Life Day. Yeah, and so it's nice. You have Filoni and Favreau really knowing the universe, and once they know it well, and I'm not saying that Abrams and Johnson didn't know it, but they can drop these little nuggets that are for diehard fans and also for people to Google later. So it's really nice to have that be so different and fresh, and yet somewhat familiar, instead of some of the entries in the new trilogy being too reliant on familiarity.
Yeah, and I think it's ironic because when Abrams came out with Star Trek 2009, people said, "Oh, this is a Star Wars movie, disguised as a Star Trek movie. He should be directing Star Wars." And now that he's done Star Wars, he's always talked about how big a fan he is, and I don't deny that. I just feel like just because you're a fan of something doesn't mean you're qualified to manage it or to steer it, right? Right. So, because David, what you're talking about earlier with those emotional moments that you connected to in The Rise of Skywalker, mm-hmm. I probably would have tuned into those if I hadn't felt so cheated by every other moment. There's so much carpet ripping out from under the audience, from Chewbacca, oh my God, he's dead. And then 2 minutes later, oh, he's not dead. To C-3PO, there's the line in the trailer, like, I'm saying goodbye to my friends. And then 5 minutes later,
his friends
that personality.
Didn't know. He's not even talking to old characters. It's like people we knew for 5 minutes. Yeah.
Again, I got to go back to YouTube. Someone was talking about, wouldn't it have been interesting if before they unplugged him, he had been looking at like replaying images of his adventures with Luke, Han, and Leia, and that's the friends he was talking about. like
Mandalorian flashbacks.
My real friends.
Right. but and then down to that climax where like people are. But then going back to the climax of the movie where you've got the Emperor and he wants to kill Rey, but then he doesn't want to kill Rey. He wants to take her power, but then she kills him, which is actually what he wanted, but then it actually turns out to be not what he wanted, so it does kill him. To Kylo Ren getting thrown down the chasm, and he crawls back and he saves Rey, and then he dies so she can live. It's like there's so much back and forth that those little quiet moments, those needed to be something in a Star Wars TV show because they don't belong in this movie.
Yeah. That's why I thought it should have been stretched out, because this felt like you could feel like, oh, this is where J.J. Abrams wanted to take this trilogy. Not that he's exactly the best guy at endings, and he's admitted that himself. And he tried to shove all of that into one film. And, oh God! Yeah, you can see the.
Here's one thing I realized: did anybody find it odd that when we kind of reunite with Lando, he says he greets Chewbacca and everything. He doesn't say anything about Han. Where's Han? Like Chewie's there is like with Chewie, you always expect to see Han, and it seems like this guy's been like laying low in the edge of the universe somewhere. Maybe he didn't know about Han, but at no point is like, Chewie, where's Han?
Well, they didn't think
Chewbacca.
about it because they banked up your nostalgia. And hey, look, it's Maz Kanata! And hey, look, TIE Fighter!
And what was he traveling in? It looks like a traveling costume shop.
Yeah, he looked like he got that from Chicago Costume on Fulton Avenue.
I don't know.
Well, the only thing I can think of is, if we're talking about in the context of the actual story, maybe he and Han had a falling out. So it's like, that guy's dead to me. And now he's literally dead to me.
Well, this is another thing that I'd like to touch on, and it really kind of ticks me off, is that, there's a lot of, I think in these big franchise blockbuster movies lately, I would say within the past maybe 5 years, you get all these articles now popping up on whatever websites, and it's always, in this case, J.J. Abrams explains.
Yeah.
Whatever, it could be Scorsese explains. I want to see the movie, and I want to be able to follow the movie, understand the movie, take in the movie. I don't want any afterthought explanations. It shouldn't have to be that way.
Oh yeah,
well,
I mean,
when
because
you properly write a movie, it does that. Yeah.
Well, right, but you're talking about like with, was it Xana? It was explained, or he explained,
Jana,
or someone said that Jana.
Who gives a shit?
Right, but she is actually supposed to be Lando's daughter, which was revealed like
and
that got cut out or something.
Yeah, we don't find out until J.J. Abrams says it. Like, oh.
No, you know where we're gonna find out? We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out when the novelization of this movie is released in like March. And they did the same thing with Last Jedi, where this like revised novelization was released like 3 months later. Who wants to read a novelization of a movie that you already saw like 3 months later? Yeah, I know that certain diehard Star Wars fans will probably be interested, but I thought, like, even growing up, the whole idea of like, movie tie-ins or novelizations is to get you kind of, it could drop the same week as, or the week after. Mm-hmm. It used to be the week after a movie's released, a big movie like this, as the novelization. So now you've seen the movie, now see what else you can get out of it by reading the novelization. But now it's like it's coming out in like 3 months. Who cares? I'm gonna be on to A Quiet Place 2 or something. It's like, what the heck?
Well, it's possibly because they
Uncut Gems. So.
Well, a much better film, by the way. But no, I think the problem is because JJ notoriously had said, like, what was it, like 3 weeks ago? Oh yeah, the film's finally done. that the person who was writing that novel probably had to watch the movie to find out what story they could tell in a book that spawned off of it. But, because the other thing is some of this stuff that's come out on YouTube and other articles is the explanation of like Matt Smith and his character and how that explains the whole Exegol problem and like who was manning those ships, who were those people in the stands in the Sith, lore and in the Sith stadium. It was a really interesting story that could have been handled in like a couple minutes of dialogue if you had cut out all the scenes. But it's just that, and when I read that, I was like, oh, that's the same spark of imagination that I get in each episode of The Mandalorian. These little seeds that cause me to think, oh, I'm writing this own story in my head. I almost don't need to see it on screen, but it's nice to know that there are people thinking bigger in what I'm watching.
Well, that's because television is a writer's medium. Film isn't. Film is. If you want to make a huge film, you can make it a writer's medium. But if you're writing television, you kind of put little nuggets of that in there, and with these, they didn't think about.
No, I was going to say the best movies do both, and I think we've got, we've got one trilogy that is exemplary writing, at least in terms of structure, not necessarily dialogue, but the ideas are all there. And you've got the prequel trilogy, which you mentioned, Mike, expands a lot on the mythos and has some great locations and ideas in it, even if the dialogue's terrible. So there's no reason not to have that. I mean, you've got people on YouTube who are writing better versions of these movies in reaction to these movies saying, oh, no, instead of doing this, do this. And I'm looking at this saying, yeah, that's a really great idea. J.J. Abrams came out right after The Rise of Skywalker came out. He was being interviewed, and he famously said, this is sometime last week, the people who hate this movie and are criticizing it, you're right. The people who love this movie, I question your sanity, or something like that. He was joking, but I'm like, apply that mentality at the script stage or the editing stage or whatever. Go back to Bob Iger and say, look, I will give you $50 million if you either take my name off this picture or push it back 6 months so we can make an actual movie that we're proud to release instead of this thing that's limping across the finish line.
Yeah, like one of the reasons I said that I don't envy Abrams is that, like, I was listening to an interview this morning with him, and he was saying that he was given like 3 months less than the amount of time he had on Force Awakens for Rise of Skywalker. It's like, wow, I don't understand what the rush is.
They've got their release dates. I mean, if you look at the year Disney has had, they've had a blockbuster. I mean, they famously crossed the $10 billion mark in terms of their movies this year. I think Rise of Skywalker, they're saying hopefully will be the 11th or maybe it's the 10th or something. But like every month this year, they had a giant movie come out.
Yeah, I guess.
So I think Star Wars was going to be their December. It's like their number 12. They got to have it. So I think to move that release date would have signaled possible failure. Like the nerd rage on the internet would be like, see, I told you this whole thing's a mess and they don't know what they're doing. They had to move the date out. Even if it's in the spirit of getting it right. And the whole thing felt half-baked.
Yeah, I do agree. I will take a step back and agree with you that television is a writer's medium, but doesn't excuse the fact that you wrote this thing like you were on fucking cocaine when it came up with these sequel trilogies because Kathleen pushed them, and I don't want to just solely place it on Kathleen Kennedy. It could be Bob Iger and other hands in the pot that maybe aren't as that people don't know about, but Disney in general wanted this property out, and that's why maybe George Lucas compared them to white slavers as he did 3 years ago, because he knew, this is something I care about. This is something I carefully detailed, and even if fans didn't like it, these are my stories that I was in love with, and Disney wanted to make a movie for the fans. And it was something I addressed in an old video of mine called Have Fans Been Too Hard on George Lucas? And it was really about sort of, I guess, the infancy of the internet finding someone to put all of their anger, frustration, hatred, the dark side on them. And George was one of those guys where, I mean, hey, I objectively still don't think the prequels are the greatest thing, but at least they took their time. Mm-hmm. And these movies, I'm not saying that they're better than the prequels or worse than the prequels, but at least the prequels are a little planned out. And I think this is a time for everyone at Disney to take a few steps back, stop firing everyone at every second. You know, whether it be Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, is that it? Yeah.
They were fired off Solo.
Yeah, for Solo, or whether it be the Game of Thrones guys, because we know what happened with that. Let's take some time and look at some treatments, look at some stories, and say, now that's a good story. That's something I would want to see, not just an audience, but I would want to see. I mean, the whole reason these whole reboots and rehashes started was because a Batman Begins, in a way. Because, you know, we as we know, Batman Returns got too goofy and full of itself, you know, proceeding with Batman Forever with that. And then Batman Begins went in with a gritty story, gritty atmosphere from a director that fit his forte. And now Christopher Nolan is a household name. And then what did DC do? They took Nolan's formula and tried to copy it and rush it through the door with their DC films. And that's sort of what Disney has done with the Star Wars property, minus something like The Mandalorian. Hello, where they had a creator to take their time with it. So let this be a time to really see what we could do with Star Wars that says more than fan service.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, I think we've exhausted a lot of kind of the points that, like the key points that we wanted to hit on tonight. So we'll kind of wrap this up. But I will say, there's talk of like Kevin Feige, you know, from the Marvel side of things, taking over the Star Wars side of things, and I would be fine with that.
I'm okay, but it's too familiar.
I'm not talking about as far as the voice. I'm talking about just as far as being that steering person, like the new Kathleen Kennedy, to come in and say, all right, you know, Favreau and Filoni, you've proved yourself on this Mandalorian series, or get somebody else who's equally qualified and passionate, and just say, I want to see the outline for the new trilogy on my desk, you know, in July, and then we'll talk. None of this, we're not going to camera, we're not putting any release dates out there. We're going to get this right. They can Marvelize it, for better or worse. So,
well, it's funny you say that, because aren't some people saying Kevin Feige would be the guy?
That's what I'm saying. I've heard that speculation, and I think that's the thing that makes the most sense. If not him, then someone who has that same kind of a mentality to run the show. Maybe if that's Jon Favreau, I think that's great.
I mean, honestly, I say give it to Filoni.
I'd say let's take our time and not just go, who's the closest guy? I'll go with them. Although Filoni, I think, is a wonderful choice. But let's see what everyone has to put on the table and give it a couple of years.
Yeah. And it sounds like they may be moving in that direction. Like if the rumors are true and they're going to sit on the Star Wars Cinematic Universe for another 3 years at this point. Mm-hmm. That's plenty of time to get something right and get something out there and frankly make audiences care again. So
for sure.
All right. Well, guys, I know it's late, and I really again appreciate you hanging out and talking Star Wars. And I just got the low battery indicator on my phone, so. Yeah, right. Oh, and it's weird. It freezes Skype when it comes up. So with that, Mike, one more time, do the thing.
Smash the subscribe button. Smash.
Yes, Boba Fett smash. Yes, please like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. We will be back next season. Hopefully, none of us will be hit by a bus or anything to talk about Mandalorian season 2, episode by episode, on What If He Doesn't Survive. So with that, gentlemen, thank you very much. Here's to new and great Star Wars in the future, and have a lovely night.
One of us will be in carbonite.
All right. I love you all. And Epstein didn't kill himself. I just
excellent coda to the series.
Yeah.